It always begins the same way. Not with war, not with invasion, not with soldiers marching across borders. It begins with a handshake, a smile, a promise wrapped in polite words. A loan, the most bloodless weapon humanity ever invented, yet the most powerful force ever used to bend entire nations to their knees. Most people think slavery ended long ago, but it didn't. It simply changed form, changing chains of iron into chains of numbers, numbers that governments sign, leaders accept, and generations pay for. This is the story of how debt decides the fate of countries without ever firing a single shot. 1. When a country signs away its future. Picture this: a nation struggling, its economy cracked, its currency weak, its people desperate for stability. Then comes the offer: a loan with friendly conditions, a rescue package, a lifeline. But behind that lifeline is the beginning of a contract that will shape the next 50 years of that country's destiny. Because hidden inside the fine print almost no leader truly understands, is a simple rule. Debt never arrives alone. It brings its architects, teams of advisors, policy designers, and economic experts who slowly rearrange a nation's priorities. Hospitals become cost centers, schools become expenditures, public goods become liabilities, national assets become opportunities for privatization, and the country, desperate for help, agrees, not realizing that it has just handed control of its future to someone else. 2. The birth of the new empire. There's an old saying: empires of the past ruled with armies, empires of today rule with debt. No generals, no tanks, no invasions, just contracts, interest rates, deadlines, penalties. A war fought not on battlefields but in boardrooms and central banks. A war where the winner doesn't claim territory, it claims revenue streams, ports, mineral rights, energy grids, telecom networks, national airlines, and always, the taxpayer pays for it. The people who never signed the agreement, never agreed to the loan, never sat in on the meetings, where their nation's sovereignty was quietly traded away. They inherit the burden. Their children inherit the burden, sometimes even their grandchildren, because national debt doesn't die. It survives governments, elections, parliaments, and keeps feeding on the country's future. 3. The moment a country realizes it is not free. It doesn't happen suddenly. Debt slavery isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It creeps, a slow tightening of invisible chains around the decisions a nation can make. It begins with small restrictions. You must reduce subsidies. You must cut public spending. You must raise interest rates. You must privatize state assets. You must open your markets. And the nation, desperate to qualify for the next tranche of the loan, agrees. Austerity becomes the new law of the land. Hospitals close. Universities raise fees. Taxes rise. Inflation strikes. Unemployment spikes. But the payments continue. Every month, every quarter, every year. Until one day the country realizes something terrifying. Its budget is no longer its own. Its policies are no longer its own. Its economy is no longer its own. It has become a tenant in its own house, paying rent to someone who doesn't even live there. 4. The hidden architecture of control. Debt slavery isn't sloppy. It's engineered. Behind every crisis, every bailout, every assistance package, there are institutions that never appear on the evening news. Teams of analysts who know exactly how a small problem can become a national emergency, how a currency can be nudged into collapse, how a credit rating can be downgraded, how a shortage can be magnified, how political instability can be manufactured. And when the nation is weak, when its currency is falling, its people are anxious, its government is desperate, the offer comes. Always at the perfect moment. Always when refusal is impossible. Because the architects of global debt don't just respond to crises. They anticipate them. They shape them. Sometimes they even create them. 5. The auction of a nation. Once the debt becomes unpayable, and it always does, the auction begins. Not an auction with crowds and bidding paddles. A silent auction. One where pieces of the nation are sold quietly to the highest bidder. A port here, a power plant there, a highway, a railway, a natural gas field, a national airline. Step by step, the country loses control over the very things that made it sovereign. And yet the people are told it's necessary. It's reform. It's modernization. Words that sound reasonable, but hide the truth. A nation in debt becomes a nation for sale. And those who hold the debt do not buy with money. They buy with influence. The poverty trap that never lets go. Debt slavery doesn't need violence. It uses math. Because once a country's debt reaches a certain size, its fate becomes mathematically unavoidable. Payments go to interest, not to progress. Debt grows faster than the economy. Every year the country works harder, earns less, suffers more. The education budget cuts first, then healthcare, then public welfare, then infrastructure. Roads crack, schools decay, crime rises, businesses close, young people flee. And all the while, the interest meter keeps ticking. Tick, tick, tick. Because debt slavery doesn't care about citizens. It doesn't care about children. It doesn't care about democracy. It cares only about one thing: control. 7. The revolt that never comes. You would think people would rise up, march in the streets, demand freedom. But debt slavery is too silent, too technical, too invisible. People can see tanks. They can see soldiers. But they cannot see interest rates, bond markets, credit ratings, monetary policy conditions. And so the revolt never comes. Because how do you fight an enemy you cannot see? How do you resist a system that hides behind spreadsheets? How do you reclaim sovereignty from institutions that insist they are only trying to help? Debt slavery works because the chains are invisible, yet unbreakable. 8. The nations that escaped. But not every country remains trapped. Some nations recognize the chains. They see the pattern. They understand that debt is not just an economic instrument. It is a political weapon. And so they fight back in the only way possible. By building alternatives, by refusing new loans, by renegotiating old ones, by diversifying trade, by growing internal industry, by creating systems where foreign lenders cannot pull the strings. It is slow, it is painful, it is dangerous, but it is possible. Because the chains of debt are powerful, but not unbreakable. They can be broken by nations that finally understand the truth. You cannot borrow your way to freedom. You can only borrow your way into obedience. 9. The lesson. Hidden in every crisis. And so the cycle continues. Crisis, loan, control, austerity, privatization, dependence, repetition, until a nation finally learns that the greatest threat to its freedom is not an army. It's a contract. Not an invasion, but an agreement. Not a general, but an economist. Because the fate of nations today is not shaped by war or borders or ideology. It is shaped by debt. Debt that spreads silently through generations. Debt that replaces political decisions with financial obligations. Debt that turns governments into administrators of someone else's agenda. Debt that enslaves not the body but the future. 10. The final truth. Debt slavery doesn't look like slavery. It doesn't feel like slavery. It doesn't sound like slavery. But it rules. It dominates. It decides. It decides which nations rise, which nations fall, which nations stay dependent, which nations remain controlled. It decides the borders of possibility for millions of people who never chose this path. Because real power today is not held by those who conquer land, but by those who control credit. And until nations learn that financial freedom is just as important as political freedom, the chains of debt will continue to shape the world, quietly, mercilessly, and forever.